Welcome to Eggshell Transformations, a podcast for intense people. My name is Imi, and I'm here with you on a journey. Today we have a special episode with the author of a new memoir called The Bliss Road. Bliss Road is the memoir of a neurotypical daughter of an undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder parent. Her name is Engber. She's given us a very honest and moving memoir that talks about the parent-child challenge presented by this neurological condition that has affected over 75 million people worldwide. After describing the psychological, emotional, and social challenges she faced as a child, then as an adult and parent, she explains the method by which she changed her thinking and behavior to both celebrate her parents and heal. In this discussion, we will talk about what it was like for Martha to have grown up with a father with undiagnosed ASD, what you should do if that was your background, and how can you process the grief and trauma. Now to Martha. Hi Martha, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for making time to talk to me.
Thanks for having me this morning.
Absolutely. So we have
looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so we have you on today because there's a very special and unique topic that not a lot of people talk about, that you have written about. But before we dive in, can we just get to know a bit more about you? Tell us about yourself and your story, if that's okay.
I live in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area, and originally from Chicago. I have 3 books out currently, and my memoir that we'll be talking about today is Bliss Road, and that will be published in June of this coming year.
Congratulations.
And, then I have a historical. Thank you, and that'll be by Vine Leaves Press. And then I have a historical novel that'll be published next year as well. So I've been a journalist and also a fitness trainer my whole life. The two seem to go together. One.
Wow, I don't think they usually go together.
No, they definitely don't. It's a very odd situation. I tend toward having like ADHD. So the activity allows me to then sit so I can actually write and think. And that was a pretty pivotal thing I learned about myself when I was a kid. And that helped me process everything we're going to be talking about today. Writing was absolutely the only form of therapy that got me through discovering what actually happened to me when I was a kid and why. And it was, so I can't advocate that journaling or writing enough for people to help them figure out what might have occurred when they were kids.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree that it's very powerful, either through drawing, writing, or movement, for people to process things that has happened to them in the past. So do you mind telling us a bit more about what you meant when you say things in your past?
Well, I actually grew up, if you were to look at my family life just on paper or from pictures, I actually had a very happy family life. I grew up in the Chicago area. My 2 parents were very loving toward me. And I had 2 older sisters, and we were very close. We did all the normal things. We looked like a normal family. And I happened to listen to the program in which you were interviewed on the Carrie Lowe Show, and you also said the same thing. It's a very normal-looking thing. But there was something that was not wrong, that was wrong about the situation. And what eventually we found is that, and my sisters and I put together as our mother was dying, this is in the year 2012, is that my dad was undiagnosed Asperger's. And the Asperger's is a high-functioning form of autistic spectrum disorder.
Disorders, yes.
And yes, and they don't use Asperger's anymore in the U.S., but they do in other countries, so it can be a little confusing. So what that means is my dad had a very normal-looking life, a wife, kids, an income, a job, and so forth. But
what did he do for a living?
Disorder. He worked as a systems analyst at a Federal Reserve. think. And so, yes, he was very, tech oriented and so forth. And that makes sense because a lot of ASD people really find solace in technical and things that don't involve interaction, because that is, of course, the problem with ASD is that it's a neurological disorder that disrupts the communication process. And it's a thing that keeps people from bonding. And
actually,
what you can now.
Yeah, well, since you have written about it, for people who don't really, I mean, I'm sure people have heard of ASD and have a sense of what that means, but you seem to have a deeper understanding of it and an awareness of its official quote unquote definition. So can you tell us a bit more about what that is? Are people just wired differently? Is that nature or by nurture?
People generally bond by commiserating with one another. That means that in order to do that, each person has to have the skill of saying, I have not been in the exact same experience that you have, but I can guess what that's like. Mm-hmm. And I know how I feel in that situation for me. And so I can guess what it's like for you. And you say, oh, I really appreciate that. Now the two have connected. That's how we function. That's how we bond. That's how we make friendships. With a ASD person, if the example I use in the book is, if I come to you and say, my cat died, and you are an ASD person, you may have had a dog that died, but a dog is different than a cat. So you might say, oh, well, do you want to go to the store and pick up some things for the party? So there is this big dysfunction. So the one person is saying, I just told you this thing that's very upsetting to me. But the ASD person, didn't have a way to guess what I was feeling. And therefore they bypassed it.
Yeah.
And that's what gets them leads to this. It really is a myth that ASD people are not compassionate. They are. What they're missing is the clues necessary to interpret normal interactions, right? They can't read the facial. They can't read the tone of voice. They can't take one situation and extrapolate and say, oh, I know what that's like. And so,
even in that example that you've just given me, I can imagine being a child feeling really hurt on the receiving end of that.
It's even more than that. It definitely is, because your emotions are not validated ever. You don't have, the person is not going to be the person who says, oh, I'm really sad that you're sad, or I'm sorry that you're feeling confused. I mean, the deepest parts of you that need the most help are going completely unaddressed, and they don't mean to at all. That's the whole thing, is there's no malintent in my dad at all. He was trying to do the best that he could, but he didn't have the neurological setup to be able to help me. And it goes a little bit deeper than that, in that if you're a baby and a parent is not giving you this immediate sense of connection, then that was the truest. That was the most difficult part, is that it irreparably, well, no, I shouldn't say irreparably, because I have actually repaired my self-esteem quite a lot, but it negates your self-esteem. And that was a very startling thing for me to find, is that I realized that that I did not have a self-esteem at all. And it's a very weird thing for people to think about. What I had created is this sense of, if my dad didn't think I was anything, then I must not be anything. And I created a social persona that I lived within. So it was a bubble. There was nothing in the middle, but around the exterior, I had all the normal appearances. I dressed, and I was able to laugh at jokes, and I felt all that, but I knew that I couldn't let anybody in, because if they came in, then they would see there was nothing there. And it was really shocking to me. The whole process of figuring out what happened when you're a baby, as early as that, took about 10 years. It took a long time. So, and I write about it in the book, that feeling.
And I am really, really, how long is it? I think you should read it.
Okay. Envision I'm a baby of between 6 months and a year old. I'm sitting on a floor in a white-walled room. A man stands before me. Beside me is a thing people sit on. I recognize the man. He's somehow connected to the woman who feeds and dresses me. I don't have a name for him or her or the chair because I'm so young. But I know the man and woman are different from the chair. They're like me. They move and make noise. What they do determines how I feel, happy, scared, sad, or any variety of other emotions for which I have no names. I rely on people's eyes for clues about whether they'll be mean or nice to me. That's why I'm waiting for the man to look at me. I want an idea of what he'll do. The fact he hasn't looked at me yet makes me anxious because it's unusual. I've noticed when the woman walks in, she looks at me immediately. Then she smiles and picks me up. Sometimes she jiggles me around while making faces, and I feel warm inside and laugh. After studying the room, the man lowers his eyes toward me. They reach my head and without stopping, move down my face and body and slide sideways to the chair. Something happened. I don't know what. His eyes passed mine with no pause or smile or interest. He looks at the chair the same way. If he's important to me somehow, he must know what's what. If he treats me like a chair, I must be like a chair. A thing, no worse, no better.
Wow. Very powerful stuff. Can you expand on that with words?
The idea is that you get as I was researching for the book, I found a study by a University of Washington team of researchers who found that a child's self-esteem is developed by the age of 5. So that means everything that happens before you have the words for it or the verbal occurs and forms your self-esteem by that time.
Yeah.
So kids of parents who have ASD that is undiagnosed have no chance. That's what it feels like.
What developmental psychologists found is that you need mirroring to form your self-esteem and to know who you are in the world and to learn to regulate your emotions. And exactly what you're saying is these kids are deprived of that. And they don't even know. They just know that when they look at their parents, they look away or they never get the feedback that they're expecting or needed.
That's correct. And the thing with my dad that was so difficult is that there was no Asperger's or diagnosis until 1994. And he was born in the 1930s. So there was no name for it. My mother had no name for it. She just knew he was really quirky. We just knew he was quirky. We thought he was normal dad. We had nothing to compare his behavior with. And this goes to the point we were making, Rick, before I read this segment, is that that when I was researching this, there are literally hundreds of books written by autistic people, for autistic people, parents who are caregiving for autistic kids. It's about autism research. But there is nothing based for the research of the children, the neurotypical children of ASD parents.
That is
I found 6 articles total, no statistics, nothing. And you figure there are 75 million people worldwide. That's an estimate who are ASD, and likely much higher than that. But they are not getting the assessment they need, and especially females. Apparently the assessment process is highly oriented toward discovering male ASD people, whereas females go undetected often.
So if someone suspects that their parents might be on the spectrum, and that explains their suffering for all these years. Where do you point them to? What should they do?
Well, that is the phenomenon that we're at now. Is
what signs should they look out for?
I would say that if they suspect their person is autistic, depending on their relationship with the person, they can suggest the person get assessed. That is by far.
Do you know how hard it is to get assessed for that? There's so few psychologists who does that, and it's so costly, especially for adults.
Well, this goes to two different points. Number one, for the answer for people who suspect that their parent has ASD and they have suffered psychologically because of it, the best course of action they can get is therapy. The best. I have been able to discover and repair, especially in my relationship with my kids, because the kids of ASD parents will take on the bad habits of those parents. Like, for example, my dad, he didn't understand the concept of being able to hang out. It's like if you go to a social function, there's a reason that you go, and then when the reason is done, you leave. There isn't that, right? There isn't this idea of you just hang out, see what happens, and you connect with one another. It was a duty. Another thing is my relationship with my kids was affected because I was unable to be open with them. And so my kids are now grown. And so I am having to kind of crawl my way back in and discover what I need to change in myself. So I can have a hope of changing my relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And that was brutally difficult. And so
I feel quite moved by that. I'm sure it took a lot of effort.
Yeah. And so therapy is, as far as I can see, the best way to go, but it often is very difficult. I myself had some pretty harrowing experiences with therapy before I found somebody who was I could really talk to. And in terms of getting assessed, the phenomenon now, which is to adults getting assessed, which I think is a wonderful trend. And I do know how difficult it is. Typically, when they assess children in the school system, it's at least 8 professionals, psychologists, occupational school psychologist. And so it's a very difficult. It's a good chance that that parent is going to say, there's nothing wrong with me. It's all you and whatnot. You can't do anything about that. The only thing you can do is for you. But I would say, if there are people who suspect that their spouse is ASD, before they have children, get that person assessed. If they have ASD, there's a really high chance that at least one of their children will have ASD because it's a very hereditary situation. And if that's the case, then they have a name for it. Everything would have been so much different if my mom was able to come to me and say, "Oh, Dad's, he's having an Asperger's moment here. You need to go to him and tell him what he needs to do for you." If he was able to do that, I would have been able to have the words and.
I mean, that's another thing that I was curious about. When surely the relationship between the spouses would be affected too.
Yes, I think that it would. Just having the information, having a name for it, allows a process for improvement to take. You could take parenting classes, and the person who is guiding them could tell them very specific things to do. ASD people usually are very logically oriented. If the person says, "Listen, you have this baby, you need to hold this baby for 30 minutes a day, and you need to look into the child's eyes, you need to talk to the child," that is something that ASD people can do, because they'll say, "Okay, I might not understand why it's necessary. You say it's important, so I'm going to do that," and they will do that. And you can give kids the person who is the neurotypical spouse has the ability to give the child names for their feelings and be able to express that. They say, okay, if you're feeling sad, this is what this looks like, and get a little chart that has the various expressions. So the child understands what they're feeling, has a word for it, and then can go to the ASD person and say, parent, and say, I'm feeling sad, so I need you to do X. And the ASD person would probably say, okay.
Yeah, sometimes it could be quite good if it's really bad to give them certain set phrases. Even if it feels really trite at the beginning, it's at least less hurtful than them saying the things that's completely out of range,
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that is typically how they help ASD people overcome their social disconnect, is by giving what they call them as scripts.
Yeah.
It literally is a script. If you go into a situation, this is what you could say. I think that it gives them a very good beginning upon which they can improve. If you you're going to a party, they set up the situation. There's going to be a number of people. This is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to sound like. They can prepare this person mentally so that when they go in, they can say things like, even just learning to say, if somebody offers you something, would you like some coffee? Even learning to say, instead of saying no, which is what an ASD person would do, you could say, no, thank you. Because the thank you, it acknowledges
it's a social lubricant.
Right. So very small things can make a huge difference. And I know this because my nephew who is featured prominently in the book, is ASD, as is his brother. So this is my sister's two kids out of 3 have ASD. And he is a delightful young man. But he went to a special school where that handles ASD and communication disorders specifically, and so he learned, and he's just doing great. So,
and not everyone is so fortunate to have that opportunity and resources. Indeed,
that's exactly correct.
Can I ask you something personal? Like, how are you doing with your parents now? With your father?
Well, my parents are deceased. My mother died of cancer in 2012. No worries. And my dad he died about 3 years ago. And it was really when my mom died that it was the crucible that brought me full. And I include a moment with my dad when I was visiting him that brought forth the depth of his neurological condition and how it affected me. And it was a groundbreaking moment. And then after that, so I'm doing much better, but the therapy is absolutely the what's sustaining me.
How can therapy help the person who've had a parent with ASD? Obviously everyone's therapy is going to be different, but do you think you can guess the general themes and ways it can help?
It's more what I found is that you have to actually go and learn to talk aloud about your feelings.
Yes.
Because you're not, when I used writing to do that. But when you are writing in a journal, it's a very isolating thing, and you are always right, and that's not a good thing. You need feedback from somebody else. And so what I would do is I'm going to go once a week, and I'm going to write down the things that I've been thinking about this week, and I'm going to say them aloud. That was so important, just to be able to say it, because you're so closed off. It's even now amazing to me exactly how closed off I was. And I literally didn't think, when people would want to be friends, it's like I didn't know how to be friends, or when they would offer me compliments, I wouldn't take them seriously because I knew that they didn't know the real me. If they knew the real me, they wouldn't compliment me. They were complimenting a fictitious thing, persona I had created. And it was, that's what you're coming back from. And that's what you're going through this. Oh, and I also caught the, with Dr. Lamia, your interview with her, and she was talking about the grief. and you go through massive grief that because of this thing that you couldn't see, you your most important relationships are affected, like with my kids. And it was just, like I say, brutal to realize, oh my gosh, I have hurt my kids. And it's the last thing you want to do. And yet you did it because you yourself were damaged. And it's a hard thing to come to grips with. But I'm much better. I'm on the other side.
It's beautiful work that you're doing. You've written a book and you're helping people with similar experience. So you can't have alchemized it any better.
Yes,
so thank you.
I hope so. Yes.
How is it likely to affect the relationship between your parents if one of them have ASD?
In our case, as you can imagine, is my parents really loved one another, and I think my mom is one of the few people he bonded with, and but she became his enabler, which I think is normal. He would do really crazy things, and she would say, oh, it's okay, or not address it at all, or not address it with us at all. We would see how crazy it was. He once beat our family dog because that's one of the differences.
It's actually really not okay.
It's super not okay. The whole situation was that the ASD people sometimes have a very difficult time interpreting an action. And so they will misinterpret it. So, for example, something like my little sister did, he felt it was a sign of disrespect. And so he really punished her for what was more or less her just getting overexcited. It was completely inappropriate, completely off base. And he did the same thing with the dog. The dog had an accident in our basement, and he just assumed the dog was disrespecting him, which is ludicrous. And he beat this dog, and we were yelling and crying, and we were, but we never talked about it. My mom just glossed over it, and she eventually had the dog put down because he got mean after that, understandably. But there was never any discussion about, hey, this is really weird. This is not acceptable. This is right. She never confronted him about it because she was afraid to, because her livelihood depended on him. And she overall loved him. And so there was a certain resentment that comes. It's probably no different than a person who looks away from the abuse of one of their parents. And, you're almost more angry with them. It's like, hey, why don't you step up? So that actually took me quite a long time to.
And I think that's something that people need to learn, because it's very common that we frame one parent as all good and the other as all bad. And once you realize one of your parents is ASD, it's very easy for that person to become your object of anger, when actually you're probably angry with both. You're angry with your other parents for not protecting you too.
We're not protecting you. That is exactly correct. And, at least nowadays, people have the ability to get this named and deal with it openly. And if they don't, it's really on them. There's no excuse nowadays not to seek help when you need it. It's a whole different thing to try and get it. That can be a very difficult road. But it's like, if you're going to be a parent, then you have to be very responsible and understand the mental health of your child is on the line. And those parents, ASD parents, are going to need extra help to become good parents so that the child forms normal.
Thank you for your time today and for sharing so openly, not just clinically and also personally. I can hear so much compassion for both sides, and that is such a hard thing to do. I hear you not just flipping into black or white and saying, oh, these are bad people, they're bad parents. You're very balanced in your perspective, which I think I really appreciate and is much needed. I think people have a hard time acknowledging their anger. I think people very easily flip into black or white. Like if I'm angry with my dad, that means I don't love him and that means I think he's a bad person. When actually we can still love someone very deeply whilst acknowledging their limitations and how we have been deeply hurt. So I think it's a very meaningful book. I really want people who can relate to this to get it and to know that they're not alone. Is there anything?
Yes, I hope they do as well.
Yeah. Is there anything you would want to say to people who might be having this experience or suspect that they're having this experience?
I think the more you can read about it, the better to realize that you're not alone, which I felt intensely alone. And to the point it was affecting my marriage and my parenting and so forth. And so, so advocate, I guess, for it. Speak
well,
up.
The fact that there were no books available before you, it makes it really hard for people to read about it.
It absolutely does. Speaking up, talking to friends, talking to your parents, whatever form of opening up that you can do is it will lead to healing. And that's part of why I wrote the book too, is that, well, not everyone is suffering from the exact same thing as me with the ASD parent. Everybody has these little gaps in their psyche that are making them very, very unhappy, very unhappy. And you can pretend that they're not there and just keep getting stabbed by these little things. Or you can be proactive and say, this always makes me really unhappy. Why does it make me really unhappy? And hunt down the source of the unhappiness, because that's the only way to live a more blissful life as far as I can see.
I think there's a general heuristic for everyone, whether or not you have a parent with ASD. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Remy. It was really, really lovely.
I do genuinely hope, this is, it's rare that I get someone to talk about a topic that no one else talks about. And so, what an honor and pleasure.
Wow. Well, it's I'm really happy that you're open to it, and that's my whole goal. People think, oh, you're just marketing a book, you're just saying things, but it's like this is.
Well, you are, because you have to.
Journey to open it up. Well, it is, but it's like it's way more important to me to do the outreach to people and reach out to them and find the audience of these people. One of the articles I read, this woman wrote this article, and she got 154 responses from everybody, from people. These are all these hidden people, and it's like we need to, speak up and get these people not hidden. So, all right.
Please stay well, love yourself, and sending lots of good wishes to your family. I think your daughter is very lucky.
Yeah, well, thank you for...
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. For more, please head to eggshelltherapy.com. There you will find more stories, articles, and resources for people just like me and you. Bye now.
Keep putting one foot in front of the other, moving forwards, never looking back. Just one more foot in front of all those countless others, and we're there. Imagine that.